And so I lead our team based in Dallas, Texas. I've been working with VIA for 8.5 years. I've been in Dallas for the last 5. I did the first 3 years with VIA in College Station, working with college students at Texas A&M. But now my wife and I live in Dallas. I don't think I included a picture of my daughter and my wife, which is a shame because they're cool. But we have a 3.5-year-old little girl. Her name's Quinn. She is the most precious, enthusiastic little girl. Charlotte over here knows our daughter and can attest to that. And then we have another little girl on the way. We'll have another little girl come New Year's. So we're gonna have a busy Christmas holiday season. We've told family they have to come see us if they wanna see us at Christmas. But that's not the focus for today as much as I would love it to be. So mobilizing your people. Let's see if we can get this to advance. That'd be cool. In theory. Okay. That's very anticlimactic. We'll try. There we go. So I wanted to start with this. What is our ultimate goal as ministers of the gospel? And there will be open-ended questions that are for y'all's response, and this is one of them. So, what would you say is our ultimate goal as ministers of the gospel?
Make disciples.
Make disciples. Okay. What else?
Tribe, tongue, and nation. Every tribe, tongue, and nation.
Tribe, tongue, and nation. All hearing the name of Jesus. Okay. What else? Any other thoughts?
Bringing Jesus to them.
Bringing Jesus to them. Bringing Jesus to the world. Absolutely. Okay. None of those answers are wrong. All of those answers are right. What I'm hoping to work through with us today is helping us zero in on some of these strategies and vision that we cast for our people. I would say, in my own personal words, that the ultimate goal as ministers of the gospel is worship before the throne. That John Piper said it the best I've ever heard it, of missions exists because worship does not. In parts of the world, worship doesn't exist, and so therefore, God gave us strategies and ways to take the gospel that we have now labeled as missions. And so I would say that our ultimate purpose is to ensure that there's worship amongst every tribe, tongue, and nation, that we're taking the gospel to these people, that we are making disciples that do that. Yes, those are all parts of it, but the why, the vision behind what we do is so that someday there would be worship before the throne represented by every tribe, tongue, and nation that has walked the earth. So, starting from there, the first main thing I want to talk about, when it comes to mobilization, I am no expert. I just really love my job, and I really love getting to mobilize people. And I think about this question a lot of how do we mobilize people. That's my full-time job is I work primarily with churches and pastors saying, hey, how can we help mobilize your people to go to the ends of the earth? And I wrestle with it all the time of what's the best way, what's the best pathway, what's the best resource or series of steps that gets people from point A to point B. And there's a lot of great things out there. Most of them are in this hallway. You can go to half of these or most of these organizations and they can give you really good concrete steps. But not all of those are always applicable in every circumstance with what we are doing and why we're doing it. And so where I wanted to start is when it really comes to mobilizing people, we have to be really good at communicating the why behind what we do. Barna, the research group, they did a study not too long ago, a few years ago. Barna did a study on people's awareness, the American church's awareness of what the Great Commission is. So what percentage of the church, if you already know the statistic, don't ruin it. What percentage of the church would you say in America has an understanding of what the Great Commission is?
25%.
What did you say? 25%? Anybody more or less optimistic than that?
50.
50? Okay. You say less optimistic? Okay, it's slightly less optimistic. 80% of the church in America does not know what the Great Commission is. Could not tell you what it is, could not tell you the reason behind it. Only 20% of Christians in the United States have an understanding of what the Great Commission is. And that to me communicates we're not communicates to me, we're not explaining that to them. We're not telling them why the Great Commission, because one of Via's Bible studies puts it really well. If we were to hang all of missions on one verse on the Great Commission, no wonder our obedience is slow, and there's only one verse that we ever talk about in order to go to the nations. But in fact, there's 1,600 references in Scripture to God's desire for all peoples to know and worship Him. That's from Genesis to Revelation. It is in every book of the Bible. It is in all throughout the Psalms. It is all throughout the Old Testament. It's all throughout Jesus' ministry. Solomon, dedicating the temple, is praying that the foreigner would have a place to worship. David going out to confront Goliath. That was one that shook my wife considerably when we read through that. I was sitting in a coffee shop, and she was going through the Bible study with my coworker, and she comes running up behind me, shaking my shoulders, and she's like, "How did I not know this?" I was like, "What are you talking about?" And she goes, "We just read David and Goliath in the context of God's heart for all peoples." And I had no idea that there was an application for that. I was like, "Okay, tell me." Obviously, I knew where she was going, but I wanted to hear her thoughts. And she's like, when David goes out onto the battlefield to confront Goliath, because yes, there are applications of how we, go in faith and the Lord conquers our giants and these different things. But David, as he goes out, he says, "I come before you so that all the earth may know that there's a God in Israel." And yes, it's not a Great Commission statement, but it is David saying he knew that his defense of God was so that all peoples on this earth would know there's a God in Israel. So, when it comes to communicating the why, if we were to poll a cross-section of our church, of your church, what percentage of them would be able to communicate the why, not just the Great Commission, but the why behind missions in your church? If you had to put a number to that for your own church, I know my church, where I go to a church in Flower Mound, Texas, and I would venture to guess that it's probably about 10% or less that truly understand the vision and the why behind our church being engaged in missions. So, I'm not going to put you on the spot and have you answer that out loud. But as I was wrestling with this, is like, look, communicating the why. Let me see here. And if I can get this. Communicating the why is important because otherwise, we start talking about the what, we start talking about the specifics, and then God's mission becomes a program. It becomes a part of what our churches do. It becomes a ministry that's within the church that, so-and-so is super involved in missions, and so they work with the missions pastor. But God's mission isn't a program, it's a purpose that He laid out from Genesis to Revelation, a narrative all throughout Scripture, and that is what we need to communicate to our church. Because it is not as simple as, the few missionaries that we send, those are the ones that do the missions. It's like, well, obviously all of us in the room smile when we hear that because we're like, that's not the point. Yes, we need more laborers in the harvest field, but we have to have people that are praying and supporting those missionaries and sending them well and caring for them, discipling them. One of my favorite stories, St. Patrick. St. Patrick was a slave, kidnapped into slavery in Ireland. He grew up in Great Britain or the UK. He was kidnapped into slavery in Ireland as a boy. Was a shepherd. God gave him a dream, told him how to escape the country. That's not important right now, but he goes, uses the escape that the Lord showed him in a dream. He escapes to France, and there he renews his faith. And he is taught the Scriptures and raised in faith. Comes back home, reunites with his family. A couple of years after getting into ministry, he goes, "Lord's given me another dream, and it's to go back and reach all of Ireland." So he goes back to Ireland, and within his generation, the almost entirety of the island of Ireland comes to faith in Christ. And we talk about St. Patrick, not all the time, but some of us know that story. But what I love to focus on is, well, what if there hadn't been somebody in France that discipled him? That role was important for the entire nation of Ireland to hear the gospel, because then the Irish monks then went for the next 300 years and planted over 1,000 missionary compounds throughout Europe. But if a few people along the way weren't faithful to mentor or disciple or to teach, but if we're only sharing, if you're a missionary, this is what you do. It's like, no, church, this is all of us participating in this journey to take the gospel to the ends of the earth so that all peoples may know and worship before the throne. And so communicating the why, communicating the purpose, that God's mission is a purpose, is the place we have to start with everything we do in missions. If we don't have a clear purpose, if we don't have a clear why, it creates confusion, it creates more questions. You know, I think of, I'll just use my church for most of these examples. But I look at my church. We have 2 incredible staff members that work really, really hard in missions at our church. I love them both. They're great people. They're faithful to God. But they're not always great communicators. And they have a few people that are super passionate that do all the work with them, but they're working, I know for a fact, they're working 60, 70, 80 hours a week sometimes trying to just do it all. And a group of us have been working with the mission staff going, hey, let us help you. Let us do some of this so that you can focus on communicating to our church. Here's the why, because instead of you getting 80 hours, what if everybody in the church was getting 5 or 6 hours a week? We're a church of nearly 3,000 people. That would have a tremendous impact on our community in North Dallas. But she and the other guy are focused on the what of what do we need to get done today? What do we need to do this, that, and the other? It's not to say we don't do those things. But if we don't have a clear why at the beginning of all this, then it all starts to fall apart. And we hear pastors that have burnout, that can't sustain it. A mentor of mine was an example of that. I loved him. He discipled me. He married my wife and I. But he ran 100 miles an hour, 24 hours a day, every day of his life. And eventually that caught up with him, and he burned out, and he had a mental breakdown, and his whole life fell apart. I haven't talked to him in 3 or 4 years. And I look at that and I go, but if he had had a clear why that he was able to communicate to everybody else, he wouldn't have had to do everything. He would have had people that are naturally going, I love that vision. How can I help? Or, man, somebody was telling me about the why behind what our church does. How do I help? Well, that's great, because then that creates these self-identifying disciples that we can mobilize. And so clarifying the why is crucial. I probably already talked about most of this slide, so let me make sure. I guess another example I can use that is easier for any of us that are parents in the room. I don't know if everybody is, but I know I am. And my 3.5-year-old tests my patience all the time because she's asking me 90% of the day, why? Why? Why, Daddy? And there's not too long ago, it was a couple weeks ago, I told her something and she goes, why? And I said, you know what? She has a curious mind. I'll tell her why. And I told her something. She goes, well, why? So I had to go a little bit deeper. And she's like, again, she goes, why? And we went through 4 or 5 things to the point where finally I was like, you know what? I don't know. I don't know why. We're at an impasse, kiddo. You can keep asking me, but I've told you as much as I can. But it just narrowed down to me of all she was doing is she just needed to have understanding for what I was telling her to do. She was probably willing to do it. But that little girl is so inquisitive and so challenging sometimes that she just needed to know the why, and she would have probably loved to do it. And the same goes for our church and for our people. Like, they're our friends, they're our colleagues, they're the people we do life with. They're not against what we do in missions. But if they don't have a clear understanding of what it is that you're asking them to do, and why, more specifically, well, yeah, they're just going to have too many questions, and the too many questions creates a barrier that they don't want to get over. So, the why, the clarity of why is crucial, but the clarity of why is what inspires our people to action. So, if our message needs to be heard clearly by all, where would you start? It's another group conversation here. So if you were trying to communicate the message that all peoples need to hear, all peoples, all nations, need to hear about God, where would you start? I'm really good sitting in silence.
Talking to your pastor?
Talking to your pastor, yeah. If you're not the decision maker.
Or maybe, this may sound silly, but online, I know as a plant the seed, maybe you could talk to people that blows up.
Say again?
Acquaintance, people around you, acquaintance.
Yeah, starting with just your circle of influence around you, absolutely. Because if you're not the lead pastor, you don't get to make that decision all the time. My mom was on staff at a church for almost 20 years, and I guarantee there were plenty of times she got frustrated that she wasn't able to do things that she wanted to do because she had to wait for leadership to catch up or leadership to catch the vision as well. So yeah, sometimes you're leading up, sometimes you're working with your circle of influence. What are some other ways that we can start in communicating this message?
I think you start with the leadership, and then I go to the kids and students, because it's part of the foundation of faith. And so
Good.
I've been a kids minister for 14 years. So I think you start with your kids and your students, and you build that into them, and you think long term, if I can help this generation understand what the message is, then where is the church gonna be 5 years from now? Where is the church gonna be 25 years from now?
Absolutely. The next generation, nearly 50% or just over 50% of the world's population is under the age of 18. And yet most of these conversations happen at the highest levels, and we are not teaching that vision to our children. Yes?
And I was gonna say, in life group, when you be talking to everybody else, and then when I was in high school, I was at St. Louis youth group, and, they took the time to take you to do different things, and then had you so busy you didn't have time to get in trouble.
That's right. Well, yeah, and it starts with your life groups. It starts with your circle of influence. It starts in those ways. It starts with saying, well, I'm going to teach somebody. There has to be a first step. And I would add on top of all of that, that in order to have a place to start, you need to know where you're starting from. You have to be able to communicate yourself. I have a very clear why for why I am in missions. It's an anchor that I will never lose sight of. I'll never misplace. As I don't know if any of y'all were in Christine Kane's breakout earlier, but she talked about she has her why, that even on the days she doubts, which are plenty for myself included, she can lay her head on the pillow at night, talk with her husband, and go, okay, but yeah, this is why we're doing it. That, for me, is crystal clear, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But you have to know where your personal why starts, and then understanding the why and the vision behind your church's missions ministry, so that whatever you're communicating, we talk about, there's a good book called When Everything is Missions, and the thesis of the book is when everything is missions, nothing is. Because if we just start labeling everything as one thing, or you have a definition for missions, but I have my definition, and you have your definition, and he has his definition, well, then all of a sudden it again creates questions, creates a barrier that most people aren't going to conquer on their own. But if we can have the clear why, that everybody knows what we're communicating, well, that's when a company like Apple takes off, because everybody knows all these different things about Apple, or everybody knows Amazon, and it communicates clearly what it is that we're here to do. So next step, if you can call it that, saying, okay, well, if we know the why, communicating the why is paramount. How do we communicate the why? Talked about where do we start. So communicating the why is paramount to our mission, but who has the time to speak with and mobilize every single member of your church? So what I would put forth is that we must learn to identify key leaders within your church and commission them to spread the why. So this is where the story of my why comes into play. I grew up in a church that was missional, that did mission trips all year round, but there was never a clear understanding of what is our end goal, why are we doing this. I just normally go on a mission trip every year, which turns out is not as normal for most people, but for me it was. And I got to college, went to Texas A&M, loved it. I drank all the Kool-Aid at A&M. It is a cult. I love it. If you don't like A&M, that's fine. I love it. But when I was there, I met Via my junior year. My senior year, I got to go with Via on a short-term trip to China. And we worked alongside our team in central China. One of the days, we were talking with, trying to think of where I want to go. We were talking with one of the staff members, and I have to be careful sharing certain details of it. But she's Chinese, and she was the first believer in her family, and she was working for our staff at the time. And she started telling us this story of how she came to work for VIA, and for her, the Lord gave her a dream. And in this dream, she's walking along the beach at sunset. She looks out over the water as the sun is setting, and she sees somebody drowning. And so that anxious energy sets in, and she starts to take her shoes off, go, oh, gotta go save this person. And by the time she looks down at her shoes and looks back over the water, she realizes it's not one person drowning, it's hundreds of millions, it's billions of people drowning in the ocean. Well, her anxious energy turns to dread because she realizes, I can't save any of those people. I can't save 10 of them before they drown. And as she's contemplating that, she looks further down the beach and she sees some believers worshiping, tens of millions of them. But every single one of their backs is turned to the ocean. None of them see what is happening behind them. And so she has this dilemma in her head of, is God calling me to go get in this water and save people that are very worth saving right here, right now? And she says no, and she takes off running down the beach. And she gets to the first person she can reach, she turns them around, she shows them what's happening, and she goes to the next person, and the next person. And then they start turning people around, and her dream ends there, but I take it a step further when it comes to something like this, because my why is because there are billions of people drowning in the ocean. My why behind what I do is I want to ensure that I turn around as many people as I possibly can in my lifetime to go and jump in the water and save people. That's my why. That's why I will never grow tired of it, because it is not my dream. It's not my mission. It is God's, and God's just given me a way to serve in that. And so when we look at, okay, well, how do we communicate the why? That's my why. How do I go and I communicate that? Well, with the church, with churches I work with, I always start by saying, look, we've got to identify lay leaders in the church that are already bought in. It's an easy place to start. We all know that 5, 10, 20 people in our church that go on every mission trip, sign up for every outreach event, that they're willing to serve food to the homeless, they're willing to go share the gospel at the nursing home, they're willing to go to Cuba, they're willing to go to China. They just want to do something. Those are the people we start with. Because if you can rally a few of those folks, and you can communicate with them the why, and you get them bought into that vision, well, now you have 5, 10, 20 extensions of your voice in the church. Instead of my missions pastor working 80 hours a week trying to get every event done, every outreach plan, every single pregnant mother without hope baby shower. Instead of her having to do all that herself, now she has 5, 10, 20 voices that are helping get other people involved, that are sharing the why, that are mobilizing other people into this vision of we've got to take the gospel to the ends of the earth. So that's why I say it's saying, look, we've got to understand the why, and then we've got to figure out, okay, how are we communicating this? Well, the only way to communicate it, if you are not the lead pastor, if you're a lead pastor, that's a different step. Lead pastor has the responsibility that they should be teaching this already. It's another conversation for another day. But I don't think any of us in here are, and if you are, that's wonderful. But if you're not, the thing that we can do is we can rally the right people and say, okay, look, how do I gather these key leaders, and how do we make a plan together? Now that we understand the why, now we can begin to plan for the how and the what, and we can start to look at what comes next. Because movements begin with names, not numbers. I am very guilty of this all the time. With my team, and I lead them, I make them report numbers and meetings and metrics so that we make sure, okay, are we connecting with churches? Are those connections leading to ministry opportunities? Are those ministry opportunities leading to missionaries that are being sent? I'm guilty of it because I look at their reports and I tab it all up. Oh, we met our goal for the month. That's great. But the movements themselves don't start with the numbers, they start with the names. Those faces that you know well, that are passionate about it, that want to do this with you, they just need a little bit of the direction and the guardrails to run them. Our church right now, we're going through this process, working with our mission pastors, saying, look, we've got a group of us that are super ready to help. Can y'all help us build the structure? You guys tell us the why. God has placed you in leadership. We're not going to try and overrule you. Help us understand your why, and then can we as a group build a plan and start doing it together? Because people see through this. They see through when you're just thinking about the numbers of it all. A good example of this is when I was working at A&M, working in College Station with A&M students. There's a Korean guy that we met, not a believer. I was there in one of the graduate programs, and I forget how one of our staff met him, but we invited him into a Bible study, and he started attending. Super cool. Always loved getting the opportunity to do that. Well, as we started to get to know him, we said, well, what made you interested to come here? And he said, because you actually care. And we're like, well, what do you mean? Because yeah, I'm glad you can see that we care, but what do you mean? He said that every day when I walk on campus, almost every day, he said, somebody comes up to me and they ask me if I know Jesus. And he said, I can tell by the look on their face that they're just checking the box to say I've shared the gospel with an international student today. He said, so I just got in the habit of telling them yes. Even though I don't know Jesus, I just started telling them yes, because then sure enough, they just keep on walking because they didn't find their person for the day. He said, but you guys, y'all met me. We had coffee, and we had lunch, and we invited him into a Bible study, and we started to do life with him and walk him through a Discovery Bible study looking at scriptures. And he didn't come to faith during my time there, but about a year after I left College Station, heard from my friends, he gave his life to Christ. And it took us like 2.5 years of ministering with that guy to undo some of that skepticism, to undo some of that, to understand that, no, we actually see you as the name, not just a number on our stat sheet this week. And so we've got to have the same approach with our people, because they know, even though they're believers, they're not dumb. They understand when we're just trying to fill a mission trip, when we're just trying to get enough people at the missions luncheon to say that we had a successful missions luncheon. But when we care about the names, when we care about the people involved, we've communicated the why, now we have the people involved, then they're ready. They're ready to commit and sacrifice to do the work that needs to be done. So the movements begin with the names. And on top of that, mobilization happens. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about mobilizing your people. Mobilization happens when ownership moves from staff to saints. So we talk about, right, yeah, the why has got to be owned and led by the staff for a church to truly see this transformative DNA spread throughout their church. But the real mobilization, the multiplication of that happens when the ownership passes from just those couple of staff members working 80 hours a week to that group of lay leaders, to the saints that are just going to go out and give their 3 or 4 hours a week to discipling somebody and teaching them what to do. But when you have that happen, and I've seen it happen here and there, it doesn't always happen with everybody we work with, but when it does, like in Ethiopia, there's a group that we work with in Ethiopia, our staff there does. They mobilized a man at a conference in Kenya. Funny enough, wasn't even Kenyan. But we stayed in touch. We began to work with him, helped him work through some of this process, and started this process about 15 years ago. Well, then he went and started his own missions organization. He said, love you guys, but I'm just going to go start my own organization in Ethiopia. We're like, cool, great, happy to help. Well, that man, his name's Teraku. He's a friend of mine. He's gone on, and in the last decade and some change, they've sent out over 1,000 missionaries. They've baptized over 50,000 people. People that I would have never talked to. I had no ability to go and see and disciple. But he understood the why. He went back, he gathered the people, and then those people and him began to disciple people. And that led to disciples and disciples and disciples. And then those disciples said, hey, I love you guys, but I've got to go somewhere else and do this. And they started going to unreached people groups along the southern border in Ethiopia. And so, all that to say, when that ownership happens, when people understand the why, they know how to communicate it, it becomes natural to do. You know, I grew up with a youth pastor, and Charlotte will chuckle at this because she knows him well. I grew up with a youth pastor that is an obnoxious Cowboys fan. Just absolutely obnoxious Cowboys fan. So I grew up not liking the Cowboys because of that, almost despite him, to be honest. He had a tremendous impact on my life, but I was a butt as a teenager. But like we look at our sports teams of like, I'm raising my daughter right now, and I'm an Aggie. My dad was an Aggie. My grandpa was an Aggie. And my daughter watches Aggie football with me on Saturdays. And she knows the name, as a 3.5-year-old, she has the name of the quarterback for Texas A&M right now. And it's like, how simple of a thing, but she understands its importance to Daddy, and that Daddy loves doing it, and that she wants to do something that Daddy loves. And she wants to sit there with me on the couch and cheer her head off, not knowing at all what's happening. But she understands part of that process, and then for her it just becomes a part of who she is. The same we have with our disciples. As we communicate the why, we bring them into the how, well, then it just becomes a part of how they live their life. It's not an obstacle. It's not a challenge. It just becomes, well, yeah, the why makes sense, so now it's a why for me, and the whys of our life drive what we do and how we do it. So we've got to continue to do there. But I'd challenge you, whatever your role is, whatever your capacity is in your church to mobilize, I'd challenge you to write out that list of 3, 5, 10 people that you can take home, and you can figure out your why, figure out your church's why, and then you can say, hey, can we all get together and can we talk about it? Because who knows? Even if you're not a pastor on staff, God might use you to mobilize your pastor. I've seen that happen before. But it starts with somebody working through this process. So once we go through the why, then we're figuring out how do we communicate the why, then we move to this point of commission to action. Because at a certain point, once we've identified the right leaders, we need them in the game. We have to be prepared to back our why up with our how. Providing a clear how creates a healthy culture of sending. At a certain point in this whole process comes a really scary moment, scary moment for a church staff probably, when they have to entrust somebody that is not on the staff, that is not in the staff meetings, that is not making budget decisions. They have to trust that person to represent the church's vision in the community. They have to say, I trust you enough to go out and do this on behalf of our church, and to represent that name on their shirt, or to go on a mission trip and just trust they don't butcher everything up in another country. Okay, but at a certain point, we have to commission these leaders out, because if we hold tightly to, okay, well, I've got my 10, and this is super great, they are so fired up, but goodness gracious, I don't trust any of them to go out on their own and do this. So then you still end up going to every meeting, making every decision, being a part of every part of the process, to where you're still working 80 hours. You just have 10 friends that you're micromanaging through the process. And I say some of this from experience of myself. When I first started leading a team with VIA, I had to be at every event. Part of it was fun. I love being at all these things. But I had to be at every event. I had to be a part of every meeting. I wanted to meet with the churches my staff were meeting with. I wanted to do all of it. And my wife finally looked at me one day and she's like, your team's at a plateau, because you are not entrusting them to go build some of this on their own. You're not teaching them to build. You're just teaching them to do it while you hold their hand. My wife has a very discerning spirit. She is extremely wise, and she has shaped me in a lot of ways. But I always hold on to that, because at a certain point, she's right. My job as a mobilizer is to work myself out of a job. That's the beauty of what I do. At the end of the day, my goal is to do my job well enough that somebody doesn't need me, and I can go on to the next person. The same is true for starting a movement within your church. At a certain point, you're not going to know everybody involved. You're not going to be a part of every ministry outreach opportunity. You're not going to plan every ministry outreach opportunity. Our church right now, we are planning to rally a group of volunteers. We've got our core group of 5 or 6. We're planning to gather a larger group of volunteers. But our goal is to then go, we are going to commission volunteers to own one of our ministry partners. We've got a group, we work with a group in Dallas that works with men that are recovering from different types of addiction. And right now, our missions pastor, our missions minister, she's been faithfully doing all kinds of work with them, going to the events, rallying volunteers to bring food for all this stuff. But our plan, and she's leading this plan, she's gonna commission a volunteer in our church that is gonna be their job to represent our church to that ministry. That means they're communicating the needs that they have for our church. And hey, they need somebody to come serve on Saturday and serve food. Or they need somebody to come pray with these guys. And we're gonna commission somebody. It's a scary step to go, all right, this isn't theory anymore. This is us saying, go do it. Because by doing that, that takes tons of work off of our missions team's plate. Because somebody can go do it, and we've trusted, we've discipled them. It's not just a random person we pulled out of the pews. They're being discipled, they're being trained in all of this. But at a certain point, we've got to commission our people to action. We've got to get them in the game and let them actually do it. Because otherwise, you're just getting busy in a different way. I think as we're looking at this, we also have to, a quick aside to say, we do have to consider, what do we need those people to look like? What are the qualities, what are the characteristics of a healthy disciple maker? Not just a disciple, but someone we trust to be a disciple maker. You have to determine that for your church. What does that mean in terms of the why of your church? It's going to look a little different. Our church right now, we have like 35 local partners that our church works with in Dallas. There's an insane list that our missions pastor has no ability to follow through with. So she's having to figure out, okay, well, what do I need from people in order to trust them to go represent a partnership that our church gives money to, gives volunteers to, gives time to? That's a high bar. It's not just anybody. It's the same, I think of it in terms of qualifications of an elder. Qualifications of an elder is the qualifications of becoming a believer. There is a higher standard, there's a higher level of accountability, there's a higher expectation to what it takes to serve in that capacity. And so that's just a quick aside to say I am certainly not by any means saying, all right, yeah, just find your people and just get them out the door. It's a process, and there is a process you will have to discover for yourself in that. But all of this leads to, here at the bottom, it leads to the healthy sending culture. It leads to people understanding the why, knowing how to get in the game. Because commissioning isn't the end of discipleship, it's the evidence of it. And so when we look at this, commissioning our people out isn't this big, scary, awful thing. It's not well, now I'm losing somebody to the mission field, or I'm losing them to this other ministry. No, that's the evidence and the fruit of our discipleship. That's how we know our discipleship process is working. We want to work ourselves out of a job. I don't want to have to manage 30 local partners for my church. I want to disciple people that can own that, be passionate about that addiction recovery ministry, can be passionate about walking with single mothers through unplanned pregnancies. Because I'm happy to serve. That's not my why. It's somebody else's. And so, this commissioning of our people, it's not this, I don't know, like we're going to have to keep a really tight, short leash on these people. No, we should get to that process and go, joyfully, we're commissioning this person. We're celebrating that with our people. We're celebrating that on our team. Our plan is to have a quarterly gathering at our church to just report back to the group of volunteers and celebrate. Hey, what's been happening in the ministry you're serving with, and how can we just celebrate it? We don't celebrate very often in our culture with the things we're doing. We just keep planning, or we start a new plan. We don't sit down and celebrate what God has done sometimes, and that's what hopefully this process gets to. So as we get past the why, we've established a why, we're understanding how to communicate that why. We then have lay leaders that we are commissioning out. Then comes what I believe to be one of the most important steps outside of determining your why. One of the most important steps to mobilizing your people is ensuring that it doesn't just die with one generation. Because if you send out one generation of disciples, did you actually equip them well to make disciples? Because one of the other natural fruit and evidences of discipleship is more disciples. And so reproducing the cycle, figuring out how do I restart this? How do I get this back in front of people? How do I bring others in? That's the goal of mobilization, starting over again. It's really frustrating sometimes, I'll be honest, as someone who works full-time in mobilization. It's really frustrating when you're like, I just worked for 3 years with this church, and now they're good. It's a church in North Dallas I worked with for 3 years, just over. And then they came to me one day and they said, hey, we're engaging with the sending agency to raise up a church-based missions team that's going to go to Turkey and plant a church. And I was like, that's amazing. You don't really need me anymore, do you? And they're like, well, we're happy to use your stuff and stay connected. I was like, yeah, we'll stay connected, but you don't need me. And then the frustration of going, well, now I got to start over with somebody else, and we got to go through this process for 3 more years. But that's okay, because what that means is now that church, last I checked with them, they have a couple that's going to lead the team. They have 2 families that is going to join them after a few months, and they have a single gal that is considering and praying joining their team. And so that group of people, and Lord willing many others, are soon, I think next summer is their plan, going to launch to a rural part of Turkey. And they're going to plant a church, and they're going to share the gospel with Turks, and people are going to hear the gospel. That's why I love doing what I do. But that means we have to start over, because mobilization that stops with one generation isn't a movement. That's just we send somebody. But I believe that true mobilization means that we need to learn how to keep that flywheel going. We need to learn how once we do the hard work of greasing that wheel and getting that first revolution of the wheel, we've got to learn how to do the work to continue turning that wheel, to continue the momentum, because as the momentum builds, logic would tell us that it gets easier and easier and easier. And more people understand, more people are buying into the vision, more people are doing this. And we continue on and on and on. So, recapping some of that, the clarity of the why is important. We've got to identify and equip our leaders through that how process. We've got to identify and equip our leaders. Then after we've clarified the why and identified and equipped our leaders, then we've got to commission them to action. And then once we've commissioned them to action, we've got to celebrate and start over. Celebrate and reproduce. So, pausing to just poll the group. What is one step that as you're thinking through this, because again, you don't have to trust a word I've said. You don't know me. That's okay. It's fine if you're skeptical or you want to try it out for yourself. But just thinking about this process, what is one step that you could take, or a first step you could take with your church as you're thinking about this process?
So I'll just go.
Yeah.
So I don't just serve in one church, I serve a group of 155 churches.
Okay.
Where I get to speak.
It's definitely more than one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm in charge of nobody. I'm an outsider, like, kind of impartial,
Sure,
objective sort of outsider when I have these conversations, which is great to not be a stakeholder in any of the budgets
Sometimes
that
really
they're
is.
that they're navigating. But I think maybe having like small starting opportunities, things that seem really doable to start asking for, and then advising kind of an upward spiral for how they should view that when I'm communicating, getting started. Because once you've got that why, it can still be paralyzing to feel like, oh, I've got 1 million people drowning in the ocean, and I've got 17 people who are interested in missions to turn, toward the water, but to let them know, hey, 17 is fine. So coming up with maybe some local things or some small scale things to start with, so they can build on that success and feel more emboldened.
Yes. What's your name?
Andrea.
Andrea, you're going to get me on my soapbox, so hopefully it doesn't take the next 20 minutes. But that's where I'm a dreamer type. I live in the clouds too much. My wife is the realist that pulls me out of the clouds. But that is the kind of dream that I love working through in my head of like, okay, I've got this cool why, but yeah, that's still, for the average person, that's billions of people drowning in the ocean, millions of people that need to get in the game. That I can't do that. That is a big, giant goal that I can't accomplish by myself, and that overwhelms me a lot of days. Because I sit here and go, what is my work doing if there's 3 billion people that are without the gospel or without access to the gospel? There's lots more that don't have the gospel. But it does start with having that clear why then helps you place people in the right roles. Because, yeah, we're not asking people with our why, we're not asking them to own the entirety of that why. we need to have that, so that's our anchor. So that on the days when, I use the example of the single moms with unplanned pregnancies because my wife did some stuff with that in our church. Because on the days when you're serving 2 moms in Dallas, Texas, and then you get reminded of this, there's 3 billion people, and it's like, yeah, but that mom could go on to do so much more. That young man who's troubled and struggling with addiction could be St. Patrick. And I'm not here to promise what that means for our disciples, but it is understanding of like, yeah, we've got to be careful not to just sell people on a big dream and not have steps and puzzle pieces that we're putting together for our churches. Because once you do, well, yeah, then you can say, hey, Andrew, yeah, I don't need you to save 3 billion people drowning. But playing your part, and then your friend playing her part, and then Robert's playing his part, when we start to add these pieces up, all of a sudden, holy cow, we are able to then come back and celebrate. Wow, my part that I played actually contributed to this whole giant dream that we're chasing as a church. And I'm not saying everybody's why at the church needs to be 3 billion unreached. It might be, we understand the unreached, but here's our people group. That's our why, to see this people group reached. And that might be more attainable or more palatable. But yes, that is a great thought of having these puzzle pieces in place. What else? What's another place you would start with your church? And then we'll land the plane here in a second and do some questions. What's a change you would make in your church or something you would start in your church that would help you get started on this process?
Well, I think you have to find your champions,
Mm-hmm.
and get them educated and on board and, continuing to pour into them and disciple them so that they can keep that going.
Yep, you have to have your champions. You have to have the extensions of your voice. Your voice only carries so far, even on staff.
Mm-hmm.
Your voice only carries so far and reaches so many people. But multiplying that voice impacts the whole church really quickly. Absolutely. Maybe one more thought. I know there's some thinkers in the group that are already thinking through this, so I'll just wait until one of you pipes up. Well, hopefully somebody pipes up. All right, well, we'll keep moving then. We'll get some of you thinkers to talk here in a minute. But I do want y'all, my prayer, I don't need you to ever remember my name. I don't need you to write down my contact information, though I'll share it in a minute. I do hope, though, that some of this is helpful and does get you thinking for your church. Because ultimately, like I said, my goal is turning as many people around and pointing them to the ocean as possible. And that's people like y'all that just hopefully by sharing it, it sparks an idea. It gives you a name in your head. It gives you a ministry to connect with. It gives you a pastor that might be open to this conversation. That's my only hope with teaching this workshop today. So yeah, just recapping this, but the takeaway from this one is when people own the why, they naturally reproduce the what. And we talk about missions pastor working 80 hours a week trying to do the what, but trying to do the ministry. But when you have people that own the why, that's their natural fruit. That's what we talked about. Because reproduction is the fruit of your clarity and your obedience to the word. Clarity of your obedience. So when your church organization knows why it exists and who it's called to reach, the what will never run dry. It's it's that flywheel that you have to labor so hard to get turning, so hard to get moving. But once you do, once you invest that time and effort, well, that just becomes natural. It produces the what. It'll never run out. I can promise you that. God's kingdom doesn't work that way. So, as I land the plane here, the last thing, and then we can ask questions, talk as a group, do whatever y'all want to do, or if you're tired of hearing me talk, you can leave. I won't hold you captive any longer, but unless Jimmy lets me. So, but as I think about this, and I think about the why, and getting to the what, I think Dr. Bob mentioned it this morning, actually, which is really convenient for me because it's not just me saying it. But the church, Big C Church, already possesses the resources and people needed to finish the Great Commission. Some research was done recently that estimates that we have 9,000 times the amount of resources needed to complete the Great Commission. We have 3,000 times the people needed to complete the Great Commission. The problem is our obedience. That's a tough pill to swallow. Now that takes into account, yes, a lot of different denominations and beliefs and the cumulative wealth of the church, and there's some liberties they took in their research that I won't, live and die by. But the sentiment of what they're trying to communicate is clear. Regardless of how you define it, we already possess what we need. We already have the faith. And in fact, 80% of the church isn't in the West anymore. 80% of the evangelical church is in Asia, Africa, Latin America, places in the world where the unreached live. That rings a bell. And we have to figure out, well, what's my part that I have to be obedient to? My part is to mobilize, and I love doing it. It's the best job in the world. Okay, but some people's part is to preach the word. Some people's part is to be the prayer warrior. So, as we think about it, as you think about your part, as you think about your church, your family, your ministry, I think about my daughter all the time doing this, because my only goal, I know my why, but my only goal at the end of my life, I want my daughter to do immeasurably more for the kingdom than I do. And that's a pretty cool thought. It's a scary thought, because who knows what that 3-year-old's going to do someday. She can conquer the world or burn it down. But that's my goal. I want my daughter to do immeasurably more than I could ever do. I want God to use her and her little sister that'll join us soon to do more than I could ever accomplish. But that only happens. I communicate a why. I teach them how to do it. And I commission them out to do the what. I have to equip my daughters to do that. Same as we've got to equip our churches, equip our people. Because that's how the Great Commission gets finished. It's not to say it's up to me. I can't rush the day that God returns. But I do have a part to play, and that's very clear. So, what questions do you have? I don't know if you have questions or what, but what questions do you have about some of this, or what thoughts come to mind that you'd like to share with the group?
I was going to say earlier, you talk about keep the wheel going.
Mm-hmm.
Be encouraging and enabling. Got to turn.
Yep.
Yeah, and that would be part of it, encouraging to me, enabling them. And that's part of letting go too.
Yep. Oh, it's not a one and done process. That's the hard work of it. It's not, again, I'm going to borrow from Christine Kane because she's way better at this than I am. But she talked about the process of it's not all right, I've done it. Let's, the work renews every day. We have to die to ourselves every day. And the people we're leading need that as well. They need the encouragement, the hope on a day where, maybe they're really struggling with their why one day. There's a season not too long ago that was just not enjoyable for me, to put it one way. I was just not in a great spot, spiritually or emotionally, and my wife so faithfully and gently, but directly, looked at me, and she brought me back to my why. She told the story to me, which was really special, because she's heard me say it enough, she knows what it is. But she repeated that story back to me, and she looked at me and she goes, you know your why. This just sucks right now. And I was like, yeah, you're right, babe. And that pulled me out of that season. I give thanks to that every day, because that's what we need sometimes. So yeah, the flywheel doesn't just, once you start it, you can't let go of the wheel and all right, it's just going to keep cranking forever. It takes the oil on the wheels and the gears. It takes your effort and your
It's not
muscles.
perpetual motion.
No. And if we could figure that out, we're having a different workshop. So, but what other thoughts or questions do you have? Because I think we ended 2:15. Is that correct? Somebody? Okay. Thank you. So yeah, we've got a few minutes for questions and thoughts. All right. Well, I'm happy to talk some more. It's my number and my email. You can take a picture of that. Shoot me a text or email if you have thoughts or questions, or you have ideas that you've seen work well. I am an avid thief of everybody else's success. If you have something that works well, I will gladly adopt it and start using it. So please share ideas, thoughts, questions, concerns. If you think I'm way off base, I'm happy to receive that feedback and work on it, because I wouldn't be a good mobilizer if I wasn't willing to do that. So I want to thank you all for joining me, letting me share a little bit of my heart and why I love doing what I do. But I'm going to close this in some prayer, and then y'all are welcome to skedaddle. Heavenly Father, we thank you for today. Father, our heart breaks that your name is not known in all the earth. You gave us that commission 2,000 years ago, and we're not there yet. Father, I do pray that it happens in my day, though. I would love for my daughters to be alive when you return. Get to see your face descending on the clouds. Father, I pray that you would use what little I have, what little we have in this room, to contribute to that end. Father, there are billions of people drowning in the ocean, and I can't save them. Only you can, Father. Lord, I pray that you would remind us of that daily, that you would renew our spirits daily, that your love and your word would guide us, that we would rely on your spirit for the power and the strength and the perseverance, that we would surround ourselves with accountability and faithful brothers and sisters in Christ that can direct us, that can hold us accountable. Father, we've all been given a task in your great commission. We all have a part to play, and some of those parts, I believe, take us to the end of the Great Commission. Someday, every tribe, tongue, and nation is worshiping before the throne, before the Lamb. They're crying out with a loud voice, salvation belongs to our God. Father, what a day that will be. What a glorious sight that will be. And Father, I pray that you'd use us to that end. Father, humble our hearts. Take our names out of the history books. We don't need to be recognized or understood in any of this, but Father, we just ask that your name will endure, that your name would be known. It's the name of your Son, Jesus, that we pray. Amen.
Amen.